But anyway, that's him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
awesome. Anyway, hey Brian, how are you? Good to see you again. Hey Brian, you still with us?
We could start a podcast.
Yeah, let's do it, Tim.
Dude, I'll give you $100 and I'll take out the Benihana's if you slide that 75-foot handrail. I'll give you 600 tries. I'll be back next week.
Well, in the early skate days, the closest I came to being a photographer was when we were filming skate videos in the early 90s, 93, 94. I was shooting a lot of Super 8 film. And I think a lot of us had like random Polaroid cameras and stuff here and there, but that was kind of the extent of it. And then about, 6 or 7 years later, when I was kind of starting to get kind of deep into acting, I started really kind of focusing on the crew and the gear and the cameras and the lighting. And I started kind of going, I wonder if I can take my knowledge of using automatic Super 8 cameras a little bit farther, just go a little deeper with it. And I just started picking the brains of the camera crew and learning about film and lenses and f-stop and, lighting, different, Kelvin, color temperature. And I just kind of dove in and I started buying film cameras. And I even bought a Bolex 16 millimeter camera because I just wanted to dive in and learn about that world. And skateboarding is a very one-on-one kind of experience. It's very subjective. It's very personal and it's self-controlled, like photography and skateboarding for me are the most ultimately pleasing endeavors. I love acting, but it's a group experience, right? Whereas photography and skateboarding, you absolutely guide every single aspect of it personally. And so you're constantly aware of stuff and you're questioning yourself and you're trying to navigate something just solely based on your instincts. That's really exciting to me and what keeps me going.
Wolverine, snickty snort.
What he's doing is imitating Wolverine's berserker attack with his adamantium claws.
Bye, baby kitties. Come on, son, Bob, show some affection. That's better. Come on, we're on the job.
For me, it was when I first kind of took my cameras out on the road. It was more about what does it look like to see the scenery with cameras versus just driving from point A to point B. I thought that was kind of interesting, but I didn't really know much beyond like William Christenberry's Alabama work and what I had seen in American Prospects, the Joel Sternfeld book. And so I really started going out and exploring around 2006 with an 8x10 camera. And I happened to be in San Francisco in 2007, and I saw a big Henry Wessel retrospective at SF MoMA. And that was my first real exposure to like, just kind of like everyday normal photography. Wow, what an interesting take on kind of the way to view things. I kind of feel like I'm in that lane instinctively, and seeing that exhibition kind of validated something in me that photography can be very, very personal about how you're seeing things and why for you. It doesn't have to live up to some standard or, I was pretty ignorant. I mean, I was exposed primarily early on to like Stieglitz, Steichen, Ansel Adams, all of this stuff, but I never really felt like I totally identified with it. I learned that I really identified more with kind of like, this strange kind of Robert Adams, Stephen Shore, Henry Wessel approach to kind of how we see more of the real America, whereas Ansel Adams maybe was trying to kind of romanticize the American view or whatever. I was more interested in the weird parking lot photos, that you would see in Robert Adams books, and like, the Wessel photo where it's just a man standing there watching some birds fly. Just these random little kind of, that's more interesting to me, this kind of real American view, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it. And that's kind of, you're always kind of plugged into that, I feel like, for me anyway.
The color stuff that I shot that got me into grad school and got me into some shows, it was really, like I said, it was enthralled to those guys, Shore and Sternfeld, probably the most specifically. But what I realized, but when I'd come back with like hundreds of rolls, a bunch of sheets in color, I really thought about, I hope that old sign worked out. I hope that hotel, I hope whatever. I was completely subject matter driven. And the same thing was true with the portraits. I was thinking about that person. What really changed for me in grad school was that, once I switched to black and white and I was working on a specific project here in Central Illinois, I'd come back with the same amount of film, same rolls and sheets, but like, I'd be like, well, there's some roads, there's some trees, there's some, whatever. And
Yeah,
so it was a
I love that, Tim.
Yeah. But it was an important total shift from me thinking about subject matter to me thinking about form and what I have to do to make the picture.
Mm-hmm.
And so that has been a major change. Is like, like when I teach or when I do talks and stuff, I'm like, I'm much more interested in form than in subject matter, because I think form is the way that we're all individuated, that we are idiosyncratic, and because each of us has a different approach to this thing. We can shoot the same stuff, but we have a different approach. And so that was the really big thing. But what, the big difference also, and I've talked about this before, was getting a hold of the aperture reprint of The Pond, the John Gossage book, which came out in about 2010. And, like as much as I've, not only Shore and Sternfeld, but thinking back on like Frank and, Evans and Dorothea Lange and all these, photographers that I revered, Helen Levitt, like I always thought about how it was cool to know about maybe like that interwar period or the post-war period and the Depression and race relations and, gender relations and know about celebrity and car culture, like all those kind of things that fed into these really interesting veins of photography. And, maybe your knowledge of the actual world was sort of enhanced by looking at the Americans, or whatever. When I got a hold of that Gossage, there's nothing you're going to know about some trees and some water beforehand, nothing that's going to be enhanced, nothing is going to change. It was much more about the direct experience. And
That's
that
right.
was, and I'm saying the same thing in just a different way of what I was talking about, but the Gossage is the form driven thing. And I felt like, wow, I've connected with another human who is making sense of the world through the camera. And that was, that was the huge ground shift for me. And that, so really, like the long-term most important photographer for me is Gossage. And that move that I saw in him that I just hadn't really experienced before. So yeah, that's the big deal.
Tim, that's so well said. It's so inspiring. I'm getting all sorts of excited over here in LA. That book is phenomenal.
Mm.
And here's what I'd like to add to what you just said, which I think is so cool. When you connect with Gossage when you connect with somebody, I personally get so excited when I land on an image that I like, knowing that they noticed it too.
Mm-hmm.
They noticed that little pocket of sun coming through the thing and the way it hit the trail. And the fact that people notice these things and value that view so much that they're going to make a picture of it. And it could be baffling to somebody like, why do you make a picture of this thing?
Mm-hmm.
But whatever feeling he had in that moment, I have that same feeling when I look at the picture. It's so cool. That connectedness is fantastic. When you connect with an image, it's so exciting for me to feel what it must have felt like when Gossage was rounding a corner and he saw something that he felt connected, that experience, to experience that through the image that was made by somebody who has that experience looking at it. I like that a lot. I get really excited about that.
Well, I think, it's really, it's quite profound. Like the camera is the only embodied medium. The camera has
Yeah,
to move around with a body, even if you're
that's
using a
right.
tripod, and a movement of a few steps changes the picture. I mean, I've said this
That's right.
before, and I know it's dorky to say it, but if I were 6 inches taller, every picture I made in my whole life would be different. This is how profound this camera is, like
Mhm.
what it is in the attachment to the body. And
Yeah.
I do think, in film, they have this term called suture, which is, like how the audience relates to the maker, the DP or whoever's filming it. But like it's the
Mhm.
same thing with, like we do feel this sort of bodily, like we wonder where our footing is, we wonder how tight we are, we wonder,
Mhm.
like what the spaces and all this kind of stuff are. And that's the really profound part of, and
Mhm.
how I think the Gossage really works on somebody
Mhm.
like me, or what you're just describing,
Yeah.
is that it's not only it's an intellectual relationship, but it's also like a bodily sort of relationship to the picture,
100%. And I feel like that sense is even stronger, Tim, when you can feel in the image, and it's a feeling when you can feel, and I always felt this from Wessel.
Mhm.
He was one of those early seeds for me, but his ultimate appreciation or wanting connection, that resonates. It,
Sure.
for me, it resonates. In other words, yeah, you might, you're going to chuckle at some irony that you might see, or there's some tongue in cheek thing here or there, or some kind of funny contrast in the environment somewhere. It's fun and it's enjoyable to experience that stuff. But when you can sense in a photographer a real, genuine curiosity and desire for connection, it resonates, and you can feel that in a book by somebody, and I really get off on that, and that's very inspiring for me.
Do you know, so much of this has for me to do also with, like, not to get too deep into this, but like for me, Heidegger was like, he said, it's not what we know about the world that's really ourselves. It's our
Yeah.
it's our habits and our inclinations and the way we move through it. That's
Mhm.
who we really are.
That's
And
right.
so you
Yeah.
get from Wessel, you get that, like, this is a wry, inquisitive fella,
Yeah, that's right.
and you sense that, and you sense the
Yeah.
different things in, like, Andrea Modica, like, like you sense where she works against the world, or
Mhm.
and you can name everybody that we love, but like that is where I find it so much more interesting than talking about the things that they photographed, like what
Same.
what the pictures are. I kind of don't care. Like I've said before, is like, but if another person can show me the way that they are making sense of the world, that's a home run for me. Like
I
that's
love
all I
that.
want.
I love
You
that.
know.
Well said.
So, like just to paint in the broadest strokes, like you could make a book of pictures that are all well resolved, like, and you could say, and what that communicates to the reader is that this person's world is resolved, and it may be at a certain distance, maybe it's a little cool in its distance. Okay, so that starts to give you cues. Other times, like if the edges are chaotic and rough, and you can say, wow, this person is one can kind of glean from that, well, life is chaotic, and occasionally there's moments of some clarity, some coherence. That's another good model to start to think about. And I really want to push my students and myself, by the way, to really think about. I kind of use this metaphor as like, if you're in analysis, I've never actually been, so I'm kind of going out here, but like, you say a lot of things, and somebody kind of helps you say, here's what I'm hearing. Here's what I think you're saying. I think the same thing is like if we make pictures for months, years, whatever, the pictures are actually telling us something. They're telling us about the relationship that we put our body and this machine against the world. And there's really interesting things to be learned from that. Like, I kind of learned in my first book, I was like, wow, I was more distant than I thought. Like I did a lot of dead foreground in vertical picture, and it's like, there's an emotional deadness. I mean, I had to say that to myself. That was there, and that was the picture I was making at that time. I don't make those pictures anymore because I'm a different person. I'm older. Like the things are different.
Mhm.
And I just find, that's where when I try to do. That's why I want my different books to be different. Is that formal the formal aspects of the picture that communicate my relationship to the world and how I'm making sense of the world at different times in my life. Because they're, for all of us, they are different. As we gain things, as we lose things, lose people, as we just get smarter, we get dumber, all this kind of stuff. If we have injuries, like if we,
Yeah.
like all of these kind of things are like they are the creature that we are. And again, I'm just going to say it probably a third time, but the camera is so responsive to this body, to this creature
Mhm.
moving through the world,
Mhm.
and that's ultimately the thing I'm the most interested in.
Well, something obviously catches my eye, right? I'm thinking of one photo in particular in the book. It's the photo in Tulsa where the scrappy house with the open gate in the foreground, and framed in between the open gate is the Bank of Oklahoma tower in the background. I shot a lot of that when I was in Tulsa because no matter where you go on the outskirts, you're always seeing that giant tower. It's kind of looming, it's rearing its ugly head and making its presence known no matter where you are. And so obviously that draws me. They're like, oh, isn't that kind of funny that the gate's opening up for this giant tower right framed in the but then my immediate next thought is, what do the edges look like? I'm very, very much an edge person. I care so much about what's on the left and what's on the right. And so I don't know what that's called. Is it balance? I don't know, but I definitely care about those edges a lot.
You know what? I want to tell you something that I think is super important. When you say something sparks my interest, is because, like, I just want to wrap up something, because when I speak to a group and I say I don't care about subject matter, I almost always get a question like, what can you possibly mean you don't care about subject matter?
Mhm,
And I was like,
mhm,
and I want to tell them that the way that they're asking the question about, like, the symbols, the signs that could be read, like all
mhm,
the
mhm,
narratization, that's where I don't care. But there's a way about subject matter that I think is absolutely essential, is that, and I've been reading a lot of phenomenology, but, like, when the body moves through the world, certain things become salient and most things are not.
mhm,
Like, and that's like, our body is constantly attuning us to these things that are important to it or not important to it. That what becomes salient to us enough to spark the interest to make the frame, to make the
mhm.
picture, that is where I'm super interested in subject matter, because those things that become salient are different to different people.
That's
And
right.
that's, again, it's part of that individuality, is like, I'm interested, things affect me in different ways than they affect Jason, than they
Sure.
affect you, Brian, like, and that is another part of the individuality, the idiosyncrasy, that I think in photographs that I'm just really looking for.
Yeah. Yep. I totally agree. I really like what you're saying, Tim. Yeah, I mean, it's such an experience. It's really such an experience. And that ultimately, I think, is the driving force more than what is the picture and all of these things. You know, and you can feel that. It's funny. I don't want to digress here, but I understand more now why I appreciate a Wessel over like a Bresson. Bresson, of course, shot unbelievable, so many photographs, but I always felt a little bit of a disconnect when I don't. We can talk about this later, Tim, but I'm curious to know your take on this. But I always had a difficult time connecting with Bresson and what might be considered this sort of like traditional street photography.
Sure.
Um, I never really felt, flipping through Bresson books, that he felt any real sense of appreciation or excitement or enthusiasm, or what was the point, I guess. Whereas you look at Wessel, and it's this guy that never has his is never without his camera, and he smiles like a kid. He gets so excited to see what's around the next corner. And I met Wessel and we spent one day together, and that was it. And he was like a little kid talking about lenses and depth of field and
Yeah.
and pulling film. And he was like, and he had already been shooting for 40 years, and he was still as excited as if it like he had just, got his first camera. I'm looking for that. And I wonder, Tim, how much you kind of place value on one's the value of one's kind of earnest curiosity and wonder. I think that has weight and it's necessary versus just kind of shooting pictures to make pictures of things. I feel like that driving curiosity it informs a lot, I feel like.
Oh, yeah.
You
I
know?
mean, like for me, and like I could state it in the ways like I think the long-term project is to just want to keep gauging myself against the world.
That's
Like
right. That's
um,
absolutely right.
I've written a lot and I talk about Wallace Stevens a lot, but he kind of, basically in some ways said like every poem is sort of a gauging, like sometimes you're really far apart from the world and sometimes things feel closer, but what you're
Mhm.
doing, and I think this is true of photographs as it is of poems or songs or whatever you do,
Mhm.
you're gauging points between you and you're just constantly wondering
Mhm.
about
Mhm.
about this thing. Now the cool thing is that the camera is actually creating a manifestation of that actual interaction with the
Yep.
world,
Mhm.
you know, in the moment. And that's another thing that I think is so profoundly different. The thing is created in the moment. It's not created in reflection. As a
Mhm.
poem must be, as a song must be created in
Mhm.
reflection.
Mhm.
Even when you're painting en plein air or whatever you're doing, like that's just different from the way that the camera operates and what it gives us. And I'll drop another Wallace Stevens line. He said, "A poem should be the cry of its occasion and not something about." And I think that each photograph is it is the occasion. It's not something about something else. It is the thing,
Mhm.
and I'm really adamant about, that's what a photograph is. And that's why, again, like, I don't want to call it about subject matter. It's an interaction. It's an entanglement with the world, and that's what makes it unique. So.
Yeah, these pictures were already made. And so I had the idea to do all black and white, previously unpublished stuff. So basically, Tim was like, "Oh, I already have a folder with a bunch of stuff," and I got it like within days. It was crazy. I had to kind of scour, I had to go through my hard drives, and I created a folder of potentials from, of photos that hadn't yet been published. So that was kind of the angle. Let's do black and white and let's do previously unpublished. So literally, it was a matter of just a couple of weeks or so of kind of going back and forth and me building my folder. And then when it was decided that we reach out to Adam and Taylor, we already had the images. And then we said, "Hey, free reign. The book it should have flaps. It should be about this size if we can. Here are the images. You guys run with it and make whatever book you want." It was so freeing.
But I think, really they kind of vibed on what we were wanting and
Yeah.
thinking. And we didn't make any changes from their first set in sequence, really, did we?
I just had one note. There was one image
Yeah.
from Tulsa that I really wanted in the book, and they obliged me. And so I was
Yeah.
like, "Okay, cool." And then other than that, we were like, "Yeah, it looks great. Let's do it." And that kind of now, I kind of feel like I needed to just completely let go of that, because now moving forward, it's giving me maybe a little bit more room to be objective to my bookmaking while being super subjective. So that was kind of a cool experience in that way. Like, because again, like Tim was saying, I think we're both really particular when we're doing our own stuff, to be completely willing to just have them do whatever they wanted. Again, that was like, I kind of felt like I needed that. And the book turned out great, I feel like. I used to be of the mindset of like, do your own thing. Now I'm more of the mindset of, if you're just kind of starting out or whatever, don't be afraid to completely copy and rip everybody off, because from there you'll be able to figure out what you don't and what you like and what you don't like, and then you'll have a greater chance of finding your own voice, as they say. So yeah, just go out there and shoot tons of photos and just try to copy and see how real or how not real it feels for you. You know what I mean?
It's interesting, Jason, because Raymond Meeks told me that, because he was talking to some students, and he's like, the other thing you can add to that is like, yeah, try to do Shore, try to do Andrea
Yeah.
Modica. You won't.
Yeah.
And that, but it is cool to kind of, like, as I was telling you, is like I had to work through that thing I thought was happening in shore. And I was, like, probably with my portraits, I was really, trying to get an Alex Soth kind of thing. And,
Mhm.
like, but I wasn't really understanding what inhabited Alec to make those
Mhm.
pictures. I was just
Mhm.
copying the picture type.
Yeah.
Anyway, like, so cool. I work through it. But
Yep.
the thing, that I want to say that I would, that what's the takeaway from what Jason is saying, what I'm trying to say is that each of you, brand new, first camera, me, other guys who've used them forever, we are absolutely idiosyncratic, unique creatures, in unique bodies. And if you can get to that, you can create something that none of us have seen before. And I just want everybody to know that there's the opportunity to create still, like, we can say nothing new under the sun. And that kind of, you can say that's true. But there's this line from Marilyn Robinson. She says, for all intents and purposes, everything has yet to be done. And this idea is what animates me. Everything is still
Yeah.
to be done.
Mhm.
And I want everybody to know that if you can really tap into this thing, you're going to make something that we haven't seen before, and that's going to be really moving, and it's going to be, it's going to be worthwhile to add to the conversation.
I think so. And I love that you use the word conversation, because I try to use that word too. I like that photographers are contributing to a greater ongoing conversation, and everybody has their little piece and their little angle. Some are in Iowa, some are in Hawaii, some are in New York. I just really like that sense of a greater thing. And, I'm thinking about Dylan. I think we've talked a little bit about Dylan. Maybe he's a big guy for me, Bob Dylan. And he needed to go through that young period of like, oh, I'm the folk guy. I'm wearing all the right clothes. I'm wearing the worker's hat. I'm doing the thing. And I'm looking up to Woody Guthrie, which is what you should be doing. And I'm doing covers of traditional folk songs, and I'm writing a song even for Woody Guthrie. I think Dylan needed to have that kind of green, stiff, formal kind of thing to ultimately become the Dylan that we all love, even going into 80s records, 90s, 2000s, and so on. And so, yeah, again, like, yeah, go out and try to photograph like your heroes or whatever and see what you find there, Anyway.
Yeah. You got to learn by playing cover tunes, but at some point, you got to start, start writing your own.
That's right. And playing those cover tunes will hopefully inform how you might start to write your own songs, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can we do it again? I said now, Silent Bob. I said